Describe to me what Dawn did with the knife.
She grabbed hold of it and she swung the arm, I suppose, the blade.
Okay.
And I didn't want to let go of it because I didn't want to hurt me anymore and I didn't want to hurt. So I held as tight as I could and shoved her away and she let go. And then I took it out of my hand because my hand hurt. She come back at me again, she's really angry.
Describe.
The man you've just watched is Robert Rhodes. In that interview, he was explaining how his estranged wife, Dawn, attacked him and their young child with a knife, and how he'd killed her in their defense. At the time, the child's own account broadly supported his story. In May 2017, a jury at the Old Bailey heard that defense. On the 30th, they came back with a majority verdict, not guilty. Rhodes walked free, and ordinarily that's where the story would end. An acquittal is supposed to be final. But 4 years later, the child who helped him walk free started telling a different story. Dawn Rhodes was 38. People who knew her, friends, colleagues, her own family described her as warm, vibrant, effervescent. By early 2016, her marriage to Robert Rhodes was over in every way but the paperwork. They were sleeping in separate rooms. She'd found someone else. She told him plainly it was over. Rhodes didn't accept that. Devices recovered from his home later showed what he'd been doing instead. Searching for ways to track a phone, read someone's messages, bypass a password. He researched Dawn's new partner and his wife. He contacted that wife directly, using a false identity, trying to turn her against her own husband. He even asked a colleague if he knew anyone who frightened Dawn's partner off. Someone big and scary, in Rhodes' own words at trial. That's not a man struggling with heartbreak, that's a man building a case for control. And underneath the surveillance, something worse was forming. Between January and mid-March 2016, Rhodes searched for poisons, sedatives, drugs that could knock someone out or kill them outright, and how to hide the taste. He later claimed it was about his own suicidal thoughts. The judge who eventually sentenced him didn't believe that, not least because in the middle of those searches, he told his GP he was no longer feeling suicidal at all. By the end of January, the court found Rhodes had already decided to kill his wife. He just hadn't chosen how yet. And he'd started drawing their child into it, encouraging the resentment, the sense that the child had to pick a side. On the evening of the 2nd of June 2016, Dawn came to the family home in Redhill to see the child as arranged. The child asked her to close her eyes and hold out her hands. A surprise, then left the room to fetch it. While Dawn stood there, unable to see, Rhodes attacked her from behind with a kitchen knife. He then injured himself and he cut the child's arm with the same knife. Those wounds weren't from Dawn, they were staged. Evidence manufactured on the spot to support the story Rhodes was about to tell. At 7:34 that evening, the child called 999. Rhodes told the call handler that Dawn had attacked them both and that he acted in self-defense. When police arrived, they found Dawn on the kitchen floor. Rhodes repeated his account. The child, still a young child, backed it up, because as far as the child understood at the time, that was what had happened. Rhodes was arrested that night, taken in, interviewed under caution.
Describe to me what Dawn did with the knife.
She grabbed hold of it and she swung the arm, I suppose, the blade.
Okay.
And I didn't want to let go of it because I didn't want to hurt me anymore and I didn't want to hurt. So I held as tight as I could and shoved her away and she let go. And then I took it out of my hand because my hand hurt. She come back at me again and she's really angry. And I swung because I wanted her to stop.
Okay. And describe how you swung.
I just
Rhodes didn't have to prove he'd acted in self-defense. Once he'd raised it, it was up to the prosecution to prove he hadn't beyond a reasonable doubt. With the child's evidence sitting on his side, that doubt was easy to find. The jury didn't have to believe Rhodes was innocent. They only had to not be sure he was guilty. In 2017, that's exactly where they landed. The cover-up had done its job. It didn't stop at the acquittal. During supervised contact, while the case was ongoing, Rhodes used every chance he got to remind the child to stick to the plan. If they didn't, he said, he'd go to prison and they'll never see him again. The child later put it simply, it would be my fault and I'll lose my mum and dad over the same event. In May 2018, Rhodes repeated the same false account under oath, this time in the family court, fighting to keep guardianship arrangements on his terms. By then, the lie had survived one criminal trial and infiltrated a second court system entirely. And the person keeping it alive was still, whenever he could get a moment alone with them, leaning on a child who couldn't have been more than 12. In November 2021, that changed. The child told a friend, then a counsellor, then the police. The account that came out was very different from 2016. Rhodes had planned it. He'd manipulated the child into helping, into believing for years that they'd been part of it. Investigators now had something they never had before, a version of events that didn't collapse under its own contradictions. But they also had a serious problem. Robert Rhodes had already been found not guilty of this exact murder. And in England, that's supposed to be the end of it. The rule against double jeopardy exists for a good reason. Without it, the state could keep a person under permanent threat, retrying them again and again until some jury eventually gave the answer prosecutors wanted. But the Criminal Justice Act 2003 carved out a narrow exception. For a small list of the most serious offences, murder is one of them. 4 things have to happen in order. First, it has to be a qualifying offence. Murder qualifies. Second, the Director of Public Prosecutions personally has to approve the application, not a junior lawyer, the DPP by name. Third, there has to be new and compelling evidence, not just new, not just persuasive, both. Evidence that wasn't heard the first time and that's reliable enough to matter. Fourth, even then, the Court of Appeal has to decide a retrial is actually in the interests of justice. In November 2024, the Court of Appeal, Lord Justice William Davis presiding, ruled that all 4 conditions were met. He called it a unique case. For the first time since 2017, the words "not guilty" stopped protecting Robert Rhodes. So officers went to arrest Robert Rhodes for murder a second time. The man they found looked almost nothing like the composed husband who sat across an interview table in 2016. But something he said at that arrest gave him away. "I thought," he told officers, "this would come back to bite me." 8 years earlier, he had a whole story ready for the interview room. This time, he had 2 words.
First question to you, in relation to this larger matter, why we're here, is tell me everything about your plan to kill your wife, Dawn Rhodes.
No comment.
Where it talks about that there was a plan to kill your wife, Dawn. From what you've seen so far, is that a true record of the plan that you had with to kill your wife?
No comment.
Now, if it's not true from what you've read so far, tell me the bits that you dispute about that.
No comment.
Because it would be helpful if you could, Robert.
No comment.
I think probably what's the most difficult thing for us to understand, and hopefully he can help us with that, is why, after all these years, has come forward and said this now.
No comment.
I mean, it's a strange thing for someone to say, isn't it, now, and remember. Why is that? I'm trying to get my head around it.
No comment.
Do you understand it?
No comment.
Sure. Do you know something that we don't know?
No comment.
Because if you do, it's the time to tell us now, Robert.
No comment.
The retrial ran for 8 weeks at Inner London Crown Court. Rhodes denied it all again. His lawyers argued the child's memory, 8 years on, couldn't be trusted in every detail. The jury heard it anyway. The searches, the stage wounds, the years of stick to the plan. On the 12th of December 2025, they came back, unanimous, guilty on all 5 counts. He'd been right about one thing, it had come back to bite him. Rhodes refused to come to court for his own sentencing, even though he was well enough to attend. Mrs. Justice Ellenbogen didn't let that pass. Prosecutors had asked her to consider a whole life order, meaning Rhodes would never be released under any circumstances. She declined. This case, as serious as it was, didn't meet that threshold. Instead, she set a 30-year starting point, reflecting 10 separate aggravating factors: the planning, the child's manipulation, the stage injuries, the Force 999 call, Dawn's fear in the months before her death, and more. The final minimum term, 29 years and 6 months, reduced to 27 years and 321 days for time Rhodes had already spent on remand. He would not be eligible even to be considered for release before then. At the first trial, Dawn was cast as part of the problem, the wife who'd had an affair, whose behaviour needed explaining. Detective Chief Inspector Kimball Eddy, who led the investigation that finally reopened this case, put it plainly afterwards. Dawn had been portrayed as the villain when she had actually been a victim of domestic abuse and coercive control at her husband's hands for years. Her mother and sister said it more simply. In murdering Dawn, they said, he took away a kind-hearted person whose generosity of spirit was never ending. She will be celebrated. He will be forgotten. As one of the prosecutors put it after the verdict, Dawn can finally be remembered by everyone in the right way. The rule against double jeopardy still stands. It has to. Nobody should live under the permanent threat of being tried again and again until the state gets the verdict it wants. But this case shows the narrow exception English law allows for, used only when the evidence truly is new, truly is compelling, and justice generally demands a second look. Robert Rhodes believed his 2017 acquittal had closed that door for good. It hadn't. Prosecutors are now separately pursuing money he inherited from Dawn's estate and her life insurance under proceeds of crime law, a process that's still ongoing. But the money was never really the point of this case. The point was a child who spent years believing they helped destroy their own family, and who eventually found the courage to say, that's not what happened. That's what finally caught up with Robert Rhodes. Dawn Rhodes was 38 years old. She was a daughter, a sister, and a mother, remembered by the people who loved her for a warmth that this case never managed to bury. And the child at the centre of it owes the world nothing more than what they've already given, the truth. May they both, in their different ways, finally have some peace.